declared a conflict of interest. So Councillor Casey will be doing this particular item, and then I will be back after that.
Hello. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I can hear you. Fantastic. It's my great pleasure to step in for Councillor Pippa, who's declared a conflict of interest for this item 30, which is the Cultural Initiatives Fund. So I will move to begin with. I need a seconder. I will move to review and approve the Cultural Initiatives Fund for Marae and Papakainga housing for 2020-2021. Do you have a seconder?
Second, please, Angela.
Thanks, Angela. Now, we do have a presentation, and then we'll have a listen and ask a few questions. I'd just like to say that this is some of the great stuff that this committee does, and my experience of these grants is they do such good work. So we'll hear all about that from Jane and from Shane, and I hope you took the opportunity to go to their clinic because they're very, very competent staffers. Over to you, Jane and Shane.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor Casey, and tēnā koutou e ngā rangatira ko Jane Aiken taku ingoa. Māori Outcomes Lead, and it's my great pleasure to present this item to you today. I just invite Shane to quickly introduce himself.
Kia ora koutou, tēnā koe Elf, tēnā koe Councillor Casey. We'll get on with the presentation, Jane.
Kia ora. So yes, we've got about 9 slides here. This largely focuses on the process that we've used this year for the Cultural Initiatives Fund and reports back to you on the grants that you gave to Marae last year, which talks to the value of these grants. So yeah, the first slide's just summarising the purpose of the Cultural Initiatives Fund and the eligibility criteria for both the Marae part of the grant and the Papakainga Māori housing. I'll take that slide as read. The process this year, we just acknowledge here that COVID presented quite a few challenges for the grant process this year. The grant opened during lockdown on 30th of March. We did open it for a full 2 months longer than normal in order to enable marae who were significantly constrained during the COVID lockdown to have a fair opportunity to be able to get their grant applications in. And we worked with many of them to acknowledge that those grant applications may need further information furnished after the closing date, which is what in fact happened, and that was easily managed. During the lockdown, we also acknowledged we were getting a lot of feedback from marae around the guidelines either not being clear or not being broad enough to cover the needs. And so we reviewed the previous guidelines, interim guidelines, and we adopted new interim guidelines so that it was very clear for applicants what was covered, and we were able to acknowledge some of the needs that they identified needed to be met. And the report later on acknowledges that we'll do a little bit more work on those guidelines and report back to this committee next year so that you can more formally consider these and adopt them prior to next year's grant round. We then had an independent assessment panel, as Councillor Casey just acknowledged. We had a briefing opportunity for councillors on 2 different days, and it was great to see 6 or so councillors attend those. We're here today looking forward to being able to hopefully offer contracts for funding straight after this committee, and acknowledging that many of you have asked for a site visit to marae, which will also follow. I understand that's happened in the past and has been really worthwhile. Next slide, please, Maya. So this is just going through some of our past applicants that have all furnished their updates to us as to what the grants have achieved over the last year or 2, and I'll just ask Shane to talk to this one.
Kia ora. This is the 4th year that Cultural Initiatives funds have contributed to Papakainga Māori housing development. The total investment is $1,050,000, which is inclusive of today's recommendation. Papakura Marae shown here is a cornerstone of that local community. Council support has assisted the marae to turn a housing vision to support their kaumātua into an actual reality. Their hard work undertaken by staff, elected members, and of course the marae has culminated in the approval to establish units at the marae site. This has been no easy feat and is the first in terms of enabling this type of development on council leased land. Stage 1 construction in the red shown here will include 6 units, with stage 2 to be constructed at a later date. Council support for this initiative has been widely acknowledged with Marae CEO recently stating that this project demonstrates a shift towards a more partnered approach with the marae that can only benefit the whole community. Why it says construction starting in August, I believe that it was being pushed out to about October. I'll take any questions.
Perhaps if we just move to the next slide and look at those at the end. So the Te Tira Hau Marae and Maungi Kia Kia Tāmaki have furnished us with a large number of beautiful photographs showing just how extensively they've been able to spread their funding across all of their internal fit out really. So this is just talking here, this slide to their external furniture, which was refreshed, and this next slide, that's fine, Maya, is showing a complete kit out of the kitchen, but they also had internal upgrades to their whare nui, to their laundry and other facilities. So really an extensive impact made with that grant. And you'll note Te Tira Hau are again an applicant this year, but focused on external and structural issues as part of a long-term program to do a full upgrade of their marae. Next slide. Te Aroha Pā up in the Rodney area have been putting a lot of planning in with whānau over the last few years, and so the grant that went towards extensive planning for their new wharekai, you can see designs here, and that the next slide shows just how valuable it is for these grants to enable the marae to lead these initiatives and upgrades themselves. Sorry, Maya, the next slide would be great. So here's just showing the whānau-based planning day, and this grant went towards all of the design and feasibility and through to resource consent. So this grant's put the marae in a position to be able to start building. The last example we've got here is Manurewa Marae, who have done extensive, and this particularly in 2019 wasn't completed until last year, but was a full refurbishment of both their tāne and their wahine wharepaku, or their toilets. So you can see here just what a complete refresh that was. Prior to this grant being given, they had to schedule in showering between tāne and wahine because the facilities were in such a poor state they were closed down. So a significant impact, and that was able to be achieved just in time for their birthday celebration. So the community at large really was able to acknowledge Council's contribution and the significant difference this grant made. Maybe one more slide there, is there?
No, that's it.
That's great. I just thought there were some more pictures. So, councillors, that's just giving you an overview really of the huge difference the grants make in lieu of being able to get on site today, but we will go there in the future. So I turn now to the actual substantive recommendations in the report, and while I largely take the report as read, just highlighting the key components in the executive summary there, which is that we had 12 applications for the grant, the SIF grant this year. The grant was oversubscribed quite significantly, so it put us in a challenging position to evaluate everyone's needs. 2 applicants were ineligible. You'll note in the guidelines that we're very clear as to which marae, being our mātawa and mana whenua marae, and we don't support the institutional maraes associated with church and education facilities, so that was a fairly clear line that we could draw there. But for the remaining 10 applications, we are recommending to you today that 9 be granted. Of those 9, 7 of them at the value requested by the marae, 2 of them at a slightly reduced value with a reduced scope based on our correspondence back and forth with the various marae about the scope of their grant. So as a result, we have here a recommendation for close to 1.2, which is the available budget spread across these 9 marae. Just to note that Te Mahurihuri Marae, which is supported here for their Papakainga housing grant, applied twice to the fund, both for the Papakainga housing and for the marae portion, due to the oversubscription, and noting that we also support Te Mahurihuri Marae in another work program, marae infrastructure program. We're recommending that we decline one of their applications. So that concludes our presentation, and happy to take questions.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks, Tony, for agreeing to second this item. Before I move to Daniel, I have a question. In the past, this is really good news for the marae, and it's good news for the councillors. And in the past, we've allowed the local councillor to deliver the good news. I just wondered, before we discuss that, Jane, could you just run through the list and tell me which wards they're all in?
Ka pai. Thank you, councillors, and I have got a pre-prepared note to enable that to happen, so I'll send that out subject to your decision this afternoon. So for the Manurewa marae, we're in the Manurewa ward, Te Kiora marae in the Rodney ward, Makaurau, Mangere o Tāhuhu, the Orake in Orake, Te Herenga Waka o Orewa in Hibiscus and Bays, Te Motua Hiaroa in Mangere o Tāhuhu, the Te Tira Hau in Maunga Kia Tāmaki, Mātātua in Mangere o Tāhuhu, and Te Mahurihuri in Albert Eden.
That's great. Thanks, Jane. Well, we'll come back to that at the end of the item, but right now I'll go to Daniel. Daniel, let's do your question and your comment.
Look, thank you, Madam Deputy Chair, and thank you to Jane and Shane and the staff for the work that's been done here. It's good stuff, and I strongly support it. An old chestnut of mine for the applications for funding for Papakainga housing and also for the Kaumātua and Kuia flats. In slower time, can you just check with the applicants, please? How much has the council charged them for development contributions and consenting fees around the work for those particular activities? Because I'm very comfortable to support the marae. I do support the marae through this funding. My long-held concern, though, is the circular nature of the council's funding obligations on the marae. We grant them money, and I want us to continue to do that, but then we take a lot of it back in the form of contributions levied. And contributions should really be levied for growth-related costs, and I'm not sure about the Kaumātua and Kuia flats is actually growth-related. I just think it's improving a level of service for vulnerable people. So it's not for now. It's not for today to sort of answer that. But can you please make some inquiries with the marae that are applying for this funding to get some information about the costs that we levy them in the form of contributions, please? But happy to support the item.
Through the chair, I can respond to some of that with regards to the Kaumātua units. There is a development contribution, but it's at a reduced rate. They qualify through our own policies as a retirement village. So they pay 0.4 of the total unit cost in the development contribution equation. So they do pay a reduced amount, but I concur with what you said, that that's a bit of a circular sort of situation at the moment. Absolutely.
Yeah. If you can get some metrics around this, please, Shane, because yes. I understand the argument that finance will have for the need to charge, but I also have a fundamental issue around the nature of that charging. As you know, the only charge that I think is an appropriate charge in that particular space is actually the stormwater charge, because moving from permeable to non-permeable surfaces with roofs and new buildings, etc. The other component of the charge I'm not necessarily on board with. So if you could make some inquiries and email me some information, Shane, I'd be very grateful.
Yes, I could do that for you, Councillor.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks, Shane. We don't have any more questions listed, so I'd just like to ask Jane about the process for if councillors wish to deliver the good news to their ward about the Cultural Initiatives Fund grants. How are we going to do that?
Thank you for the question. I will be emailing the relevant councillors as soon as this item's finished with the information that will enable you to do that directly. It'd be great if councillors let us know if they are going to do that, and then we'll also follow up after that with each of the marae to make sure that we can accelerate the grant agreements.
And do you want councillors to let you know by response to your email, or do you want that to be done now?
Following up after this via email is fine.
Fantastic. I've got a comment from Tony Keke.
Oh, kia ora, just a comment, and I didn't know Shane was going to put Papakura Marae up there, and or Jane was going to put it up as one of the slides. Otherwise, I would have. I don't think it's a conflict of interest because I haven't got an application in. It's under Papakura Marae, which you all know I'm the CEO for. But just to say thank you to Jane and Shane. The process would not have been as smooth as it was, although it was 18 months, without their support. Without their support and without the local board, including Councillor Newman and Councillor Angela Dalton's support at a local board level. So, and Shane, just want to correct you on a little bit. We're digging up the dirt. The pipes are going in about 2 weeks.
Brilliant. It's going to program then. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Just before we leave it, can I just check on the seconder, Maya? I didn't hear Angela. Angela, did you second us? Because I had Tony in the sidebar.
Yes.
That's fine. Tony, are you okay with Angela?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. That's fine, Kathy.
Okay, that's great. So it's been moved and seconded. There are no more questions or comments. I will move the resolutions. All those in favour?
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Against? Carried.
Ngā mihi kia koutou. Thank you, councillors.
Namahi. Thank you.
Okay. Kathy, thank you so much for chairing item 13. And Angela, just want to acknowledge your Māori portfolio as well, as the holder for that. We move to item 14, implementing a cross-sectorial approach to homelessness. Councillor Collins and Councillor Casey, are you both okay with moving and seconding this particular item for discussion?
Yes, thanks, Chair.
Okay, and just before I invite Debbie, Ben, Kataraina, who will be supporting this particular item, again, just to acknowledge Councillor Collins as the portfolio holder for homelessness, and I know that this particular report was that our staff spoke to Councillor Collins in regards to this. So, Debbie, all yours, supported by Ben and Kataraina.
Kia ora, Councillor Filipina and other councillors. Look, thank you very much for the opportunity to provide a brief introduction to the homelessness report. Maya, if we could just have the second slide, please. The Chair, Councillor Filipina, has asked me firstly to provide an overview of the key stakeholders that have been involved in developing Kia Whai Kāinga Tātou Katoa, which is our regional cross-sectoral homelessness plan. You will see a list of the agencies, the main agencies that have been involved, primarily through what we called the Leaders Group, which has been our sort of main cross-sectoral way of engaging with the stakeholders. But we actually started this process initially with a small establishment group that included us, Te Puna Kōkiri, the Ministry for Social Development, Community Housing Aotearoa, and also MB when it was involved. And then from there, we invited senior staff from across the agencies that you can see listed on the slide to be part of the Leaders Group to help us develop Kia Whai. So you'll see it's a mix of key central government agencies, some of the big NGOs in the region, Māori organisations, and also Foundation North from the philanthropic sector. I do just want to note that it's not a complete list. There were a range of other engagement mechanisms along the way. We had a series of regional workshops where hundreds of stakeholders and organisations participated. We've undertaken research, system mapping with stakeholders, lots of one-to-one meetings, and we've also participated participated in other hui that other stakeholders have held. So I think it's fair to say that we've developed very well-established relationships. There's good commitment to a collective impact approach, and there's strong support for Council's role leading and coordinating this work. And in particular, strong support for a regional collaborative plan that you'll see today, and including the shared vision and purpose. Could we just have the third slide, please, Maya? So I did... Since we started the development of Kia Whai, the context has changed enormously, and lately the pace of change has really accelerated, and in a very positive direction, actually. It's a very, homelessness is a very busy space, there's a lot going on, but I just wanted to touch on some of the key developments, including the role of the Ministry for Housing and Urban Development, otherwise known as HUD, because it's had a really big impact on Council's role and also the opportunities for Council and the sector. So the Ministry was established in October 2018. It's responsible for leading homelessness nationally. So it's actually been up and running for less than 2 years. Throughout 2018 and 19, we continued to work with the Leaders Group and through those other forums to develop Kia Whai, and we agreed the strategic framework, which you're being asked to endorse today. And also we landed on some priority actions for 2020. In the meantime, HUD signalled its intention to develop a national homelessness plan, and so naturally, particularly for the government agencies, attention shifted to that. And then at the beginning of this year, in February, the Aotearoa New Zealand Homelessness Action Plan was released. So it followed Kia Whai, and we were very pleased to see that it very closely aligns to the regional plan. It's a cross-government plan, so the key partners are HUD, obviously, but also Health, Oranga Tamariki, Corrections, MSD, and Kāinga Order, and their primary commitment is obviously to the national plan. But what I do want to emphasise is that the plan clearly supports regional and local approaches and also collaboration. And it comes with $337 million of funding over the next 3 years. So soon after that plan was released in March, we've had the COVID response, and this has been really transformational in terms of the impact on homelessness in the region. There's some data set out in the report on that. But also to note that the COVID response included $107 million to support responses to homelessness. So there's now, in terms of central government funding, nearly $500 million in the system to support homelessness or to address homelessness. And just to give you a sense of the kind of how quickly things are changing, just in the last few weeks, some key developments. HUD has released Mahi, the Māori and iwi Housing Innovation Framework for Action, and a fund to support that, Hei Taupua, which has $20 million tagged to it over the next 3 years, but $3 million in the coming year. HUD has also set up a partnership between Community Housing Aotearoa and Te Matapihi to support sector development, system enablers. So that's obviously a partnership that we will need to work really closely with. And we're currently awaiting announcement of the Local Innovation and Partnership Fund, which has $16.7 million in it. So just the fourth slide, please, the last slide, please, Maya. Thank you. So there is very much a collective sense that Auckland is very well placed to respond to these opportunities, and obviously Council has a critical role to play. The regional plan sets out what we need to do together in Auckland to make homelessness rare, brief and non-recurring. It's supported by the sector. There is agreement on what we need to do, and we've got well-established relationships. So in this context, what we're doing today is seeking endorsement and approval of Kia Whai Kāinga Tātou Katoa, the regional cross-sectoral plan. particularly the strategic framework and the monitoring and evaluation framework. We've also set out some indicative priority actions and highlighted, I guess, the need to be really flexible and adaptive as things continue to evolve. But having said that, the two things that we have identified as our kind of first priorities are to coordinate collaborative funding proposals for the Partnership and Innovation Fund. Obviously, the funding decisions that are made will really shape the focus going forward. And our other priority, closely aligned to that, will be working with the sector to develop or to build a simpler and more effective collaboration structure across the region. So with a particular focus on strengthening engagement with Māori partners and also some of our vulnerable groups like young people and Rainbow and Pacifica communities. So happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. And talking with Ben a few months ago, and him advising me that there was a lot of work to do with the intersectorial consultation, and it needed to come back in August. So to you again and to all the staff, thank you for all the work that you've done in regards to this particular paper. I'm going to ask Councillor Collins, who moved this particular item, if you have any comments to make, and then I'll open up for questions and comments as well.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. I'm really happy to endorse this report. I've been late on the reading, but I was casting my mind back to when I met with the officers, I think in about November of last year, where we had some initial discussions when I first picked up the portfolio, and there was a little bit of a waiting game for obvious reasons at that stage, but the amount of work that the officers, both at an operational level and a policy level, had done was quite phenomenal, and I'm really grateful for the information that they've been able to keep me informed of and how these plans have been pulled together and developed. I think what's key to the strategic framework is that there's an ongoing commitment to wraparound service, to supporting them. This isn't just making sure that people are homed and housed. The strategic framework looks at an integrated health approach and the social services that will support people. And so I'm really grateful for the plan. I'm grateful for their patience too, because I got a very clear impression from the times we've met that the operational team, at least, we're really keen to get things happening, but they've been really really patient in allowing all of these parts, both with MHUD, or the Ministry of Housing, Urban Development, Housing, and other parts, some of our social sector partners, to bring everything together, because they have had to wait for some movement from the government. So I've been really impressed, really grateful, and happy to endorse this going forward. I did ask a question which has been answered, but I just thought I would mention it in this discussion, Chair, about ongoing input from the Pacifica community, the youth community, and the LGBTQ communities, and I've been reassured. Ben was able to email me again today just to reassure me that they will continue to work with those communities so that they have a clear voice and a clear line of sight into both the impacts of homelessness on their communities and how they might support all of the work that's being developed. So just want to congratulate all of the officers and the teams that are involved in bringing this all together, because it's been a delicate piece of work where you're stringing a whole group of people together, and I'm really grateful for the work that's been done. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. I'll move now, Debbie, through to some questions. First is Councillor Coombe, and then His Worship the Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to get us got a comment that leads into a few questions, if I may. Thank you, Debbie, for the presentation and for the team that have worked on this really vital piece of work. It's really good to see it coming to us and has my full support. Having represented the city centre for over 9 years now, it has been a really pressing issue for some time. And I mean, it was only a few years ago that it was a really desperate situation. And and not that long ago that council took the view that it wasn't really our role to get involved in housing or supporting the homeless, the most vulnerable. So I just think it's great that we've had this sea change and that this really joined up approach from all of the whole sector and multiple partners. So it's all really good to see. And just as you said, Debbie, in terms of the pace of change has really accelerated, and this kind of goes to some of my questions in thinking about the work. I mean, I know there's a lot of really good meaning work that's been done around night shelters, and a few years ago that did look like perhaps a viable solution when we could see so many people sleeping on the street and there just did not seem to be options for warm, dry shelter, and government wasn't stepping in to fund an alternative. But I think the landscape, I think we can all recognise the landscape has changed. So maybe if I could just run through my questions, and I think they can kind of be answered all in one go. But the first question is just to confirm that right now, I know it's been a response to COVID, but there is a really strong commitment going forward as well, and government has funded this going into next year, that everybody who is seeking temporary accommodation and wants to move into permanent accommodation, that is available. Like I know that there is some really hard cases of people who the agencies are struggling to house for a variety of reasons. But in terms of someone needing temporary accommodation now, just to confirm, that is available and funded. The second question is that my understanding is that when it comes to, when groups like the one that presented to us earlier, and there is another group, talk about a night shelter, they say it's part of the mix of that temporary housing. My understanding is that the agencies don't agree with that. And part of the reason is because what needs to happen is a needs assessment to see where the gaps are. Because if that temporary accommodation is there, what is the gap that a night shelter would fill? And my understanding is that that really hasn't been identified. And perhaps one of the gaps, so my second question is there still a gap that needs to be identified through a needs assessment? And my understanding is that's potentially young people coming out of care and families, but they might be vulnerable groups that don't actually, a night shelter is just not suitable for them. The third question, related question, is if there is a gap that potentially a night shelter fits, and I've heard everyone kind of dances around this issue, but does the homelessness approach, the strategic framework, does it allow for a night shelter in the mix, or should we just be really clear now that that is just not, that's kind of 20th century thinking for this problem? Do we just need to really close it down? And the fourth question, this is my final kind of how it wraps together, is I know, for example, ACAB have put a lot of funding into the homelessness space, and they're waiting to hear back on where they can direct that funding, and they've got that concern that there is a need for a night shelter still. So I just would like us, how can we bring everybody along to be fully briefed so everybody understands the current landscape, the fact that the pace of change is accelerated, there is funding, things have really moved on from the situation a few years ago, just so everyone can feel that they've been heard in the debate, that the agencies are working together, and perhaps if there is a gap, to really direct them and focus them in on where there might be a need that still needs filling, so that we can be really direct about and not sort of keep dancing around this issue. So hopefully that, thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that was quite a long intro to my questions and quite a number of questions there, but they're all, I think they're all related and all really need to be addressed so that we can have a positive working relationship going forward across the whole sector. And I've also just in terms of my role as well, just so that I can be very definitive in terms of this is the response in the homelessness plan and this is how we're moving ahead. Kia ora, thank you.
No problems, Debbie. I'll just let you go through those questions.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor Coombe. And through the chair, just to note, I do have Ben Brooks and also Christine Olsen from the operational ACIPA team are available too if they want to add anything. But so I guess just to answer your first question, there's a few bits to that. The first one would be, yes, we can confirm that there is ongoing work to support everybody that is looking to move into permanent accommodation. That is continuing. The COVID funding has been made available through into next year, and all the agencies are working together, particularly through Housing First, to do that. In terms of the question about the night shelter and is it part of the mix, we do have provision in the strategic framework for emergency accommodation, and that is definitely part of the continuum. I think we would certainly take a lead from the Ministry for Housing and Urban Development on this. They will obviously be considering a proposal for funding to that, to deliver that. In terms of a community needs assessment and understanding the needs, particularly in the city, this has been part of work as or a project as part of the Aikahi initiative, which is the Inner City Auckland Homelessness Initiative, and that work has been partly completed and paused while Aikahi was put on hold. But the governance group for that project is meeting again tomorrow, so we'll get an update on the future of that initiative. I think if the community needs analysis was to indicate that there is a gap, then we would obviously continue to work with the ministry and also with the organisations around their service delivery model, how it would fit with the wider sector, to get a solution for those people who don't quite fit the other services that are being provided. So I hope that provides an answer to all of this.
Yeah, sorry, and the final question was around how is that going to be briefed to ACAB and the groups that have been working outside of the sector response?
We are planning to present an update on the information that we do have available to them at their next meeting.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Your Worship.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thanks, Debbie, for your presentation. Look, I've got three questions, so I'll just ask them separately so you have a chance to respond. And the first is really a follow-up on Pippa's comments on night shelters. Listening to Mark this morning, he said that he had been in consultation with both LifeWise and Auckland City Mission. But my clear impression from the meetings that I chair, coordinating meetings, is that those organisations, along with all of the Housing First providers, are actually not in support of a night shelter, certainly not without guarantees that it would be run in a way that would produce quite different results from the failed efforts in Auckland and Wellington last time. So I'm just seeking clarification as to what your understanding of the housing network, the Housing First network, is in regard to night shelters, because clearly a year ago it was opposed to that as a solution that carried many risks and didn't lead to any permanent outcome. Can you give us an update if there's been any change of thinking by them or, in fact, by Housing and Urban Development?
Thank you, Mayor Goff, and through the chair. So my understanding on the current state is that has not changed, and that they are looking for a revised proposal, and that their views may change when they see that. I know that all of those NGOs have had some interaction with the Night Shelter Trust and have provided some feedback and some ideas about how it could fit with the broader sector, and I think they are looking to see a revised proposal before they could comment any further. That's my understanding at this point.
And just on that same matter, there are two organisations, the Nest organisation that Joe Wycliffe was fronting and this Auckland Night Shelter Trust that Mark Thomas represented today. I've heard for quite a long time that premises are there and ready to go, etc. And we're not asking for money at the moment, and clearly there will be a but, and there will be an ask for money. Can you give us the status of where each of those shelter groups' proposals are at, and the likelihood of support being required?
What I can tell you is I understand, and from Mark Thomas's presentation this morning, that they are preparing a proposal to go to the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development. I don't know if where the Nest organisation is at with that, but perhaps the others may be able to shed some light on that. I don't think we're aware of where those are at.
Okay, maybe we can talk about that further offline. My second question is something that's not in the strategy, but we have talked about, and I've talked about with ministers and others, but it doesn't seem to be moving forward. We know that there are some thousands of of houses that are empty. Not because people are just away on holiday or because they're holiday batches, but these are houses that may be owned by people that intend to develop in the future, but it can't be bothered in the meantime letting it out. And there was a suggestion that we could use a group like Housing First to manage those properties. It would be a voluntary arrangement, not a compelled arrangement, using records maybe from Watercare or from Vector while preserving privacy requirements that we could offer to through Housing First to manage those properties, which would increase the supply of properties that could be used either for key workers where there's a shortage, for teachers, etc., or for people that are homeless. Can you give us any update as to where things are at with that and whether that's part of the wider strategy that we're talking about?
Thank you. We haven't progressed that particular initiative or that idea. Other than that, we are aware that both Panuku and Auckland Transport don't have a formal policy on this, but they do assist where they can, and they certainly work with other agencies and NGOs to provide housing for people that need it when they can. In terms of the sort of wider pool of housing and how to increase the supply for that, that is something that we could certainly look at more closely and talk to the ministry about and come back to you on.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, my last question is just, look, it's good that there's a whole lot more money there. The money has increased, but probably so too is the need. Can you just specify what our role is in terms of things like the Local Innovation and Partnership Fund and the Hei Topua Fund? Does Council have the role of pulling together the potential applicants and putting in an agreed application through to those two funds? Is that the role that we'll be playing?
Yes, and thank you through the chair. Primarily, yes. So what we would do is we're just thinking through the process at the moment because it's an unusual opportunity. Is that we would work with the key stakeholders from across the sector to confirm what the priorities are, and then to help them put together a sort of an integrated package of proposals. So it might have a range of initiatives that fit together that are going to address homelessness across the region. There will be questions around where the funding sits, how those accountability arrangements are taken care of, which we will need to work through with both the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development and also the stakeholders. At this stage, we haven't seen an RFP for that fund, so we're not really sure what the criteria will be or how they want to do it. So I guess that will be our first clue will be to see what those documents say.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Cooper.
Yeah, I think I've had my questions answered. Thank you.
Thank you. Matuakake.
Kia ora, Debbie, and thanks for your report. First of all, just like to bring back to the table the Kāinga Strategic Action Plan that the Independent Māori Statutory Board has been banging on about for the last kind of 2 years. And this is a key part of it. And I did see IMSB on your list of organisations involved in those discussions, but I kind of feel like our name's there, but we're not really involved in it. So my pledge here, Debbie, is that support for Māori involvement in these MHUD-led planning discussions, and we can, through the IMSB Secretariat, we can kind of hook you up with those key players. There are more to that list, I think, that need to be involved. I'm very much about the strategy that moves our whānau Māori from Pohara Street to Oranga Street, which is moving our whānau Māori from Poverty Street to Prosperity Street. So the bigger picture for us, yes, dealing with the homelessness or kāinga kore, but actually looking at it in the context of the whole housing scope of work. So, I support what the Mayor has said around, I'm not totally sold on these shelters either. Mayor Phil, and this philosophy of communities of care and getting the ecosystem surrounding that is a key part of that. We were very privileged, and we still are today, now that we're in level 3 COVID lockdown. And I want to pay tribute to the Ministry of Social Development, in particular the WINS office here in Papakura, as a leading example. We're getting whānau, kāinga kore whānau, homeless whānau housed within 48 hours. So there's no need for the shelter, particularly out here, if whānau that are homeless are willing. So, I think there's a lot more discussion that needs to be happening around and input into that MHUD framework or MHUD-led strategic framework that needs to be added. So my question is what is the Māori-specific approach in this framework, Debbie? How are we kia whai kāinga tātou? What is the Māori-specific framework or approach?
Well, kia ora mātua kake. Thank you for your questions. You'll see from the data that we've presented that Māori are clearly overrepresented in the homelessness community, and so it's very much a priority for us. There are a number of elements in the strategic framework that address the needs for Māori and across the principles, but also some of the action areas. And for example, one of the priority or the potential actions for this year and subject to funding would be a network of marae-based information and outreach services across the region. So we will continue to work with those stakeholders that we have worked with, and obviously we recognise that we need to strengthen the engagement with Māori, and we've taken a number of steps recently to progress that. For example, we've had a very helpful initial discussion recently with the Mana Whenua Kaitiaki Forum about how we can work with them. So yes, there are a number of ways that we can do that.
So I acknowledge. Supplementary question, Mr. Alf. Mr. Chair. Kawai. Okay, I acknowledge what you said around engagement with Mana Whenua, but I think there are a lot of other Māori providers out there that are closer to the action than a lot of our Mana Whenua organisations. Kia ora. Please include them.
Thank you.
Councillor Casey and then Councillor Newman. Can't hear you, Kathy.
It's not working. Is it working? Yep.
Yes, it is.
Here we are. I'm not going to talk about night shelters, but I do want to talk about this wonderful cross-sectoral strategic plan that's before us today. And I'd just like to say a few thank yous. I've been around the council now a few years, and this council, Auckland City Council and now the Auckland Council, has always led the country in terms of its response to homelessness. And I want to acknowledge that. that people come to us to find out how a council should best deal with that most vulnerable population. Auckland City Council held the first ever conference on homelessness, never heard of before. We had the first ever council homeless action plan. And it was a big deal. You know, I think Mark Thomas this morning said that one of the roles of council is facilitating groups to come together. It was quite a big deal in the beginning to do that, to bring all the players into the town hall that had never actually worked together before. Now we take it for granted that we can only do it by joining up, but it wasn't once the case. I'd like to pay tribute to the Rainbow panel who looked at our homeless action plan and saw that we hadn't addressed young Rainbow people finding themselves on the streets because of their circumstances at home. And again, we just take it for granted now that we are a broad church. We recognise all those groups. Thank you to Councillor Collins for mentioning that this morning. I think the portfolio is in great hands. So this is the first time. It's the first in the country, probably the first in Australasia, maybe even the first in the world, that we have a council. Look, the council led this, so let's not pretend the government led it, because we pushed the government to get their action plan out because we were ready. When, Debbie, last year sometime, we had our plan, we were waiting for the government. So now we have a joined up approach, and it's something to be really proud of. I am so immensely proud, and I want to thank the staff by name, Debbie Edwards, Ben Brooks, Katarina Maki, Claudia. Please go down the food chain and thank everybody that's been involved in this. I'll tell you what happens at Auckland Council. Our staff are so committed to homelessness, they get poached by homeless agencies. If you go around the country, you will find former Auckland Council staff doing a wonderful job in these agencies. So we're very proud of you for this piece of work today. It's been a long time coming, and if Sandy's listening, that should be a headline. I won't go without mentioning the libraries, by the way, but this is a forward-thinking, excellent strategic piece of work, and it's exactly what councils should be doing. So we're not providing services, but we're making sure that any ratepayer money goes where the evidence says it does the best work. So congratulations, everybody. As for the role of Auckland Libraries, you know, in homelessness and in our libraries, we lead the way. Auckland Libraries welcomes vulnerable communities with open arms. They have programmes for homeless people in our libraries, and I know that at the moment that won't be happening, and it is sadly missed, as we heard recently from the Auckland City Missioner, Chris Farrelly. It's a joy to go into the Central Library and see homeless people with books and on computers. So, kia kaha, thank you everybody for your work that brought us to today. I am very, very proud.
Thank you, Councillor Casey. Councillor Newman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just going back to the conversation, and I think Councillor Coombe and His Worship the Mayor raised in relation to the night shelters. I mean, I have a concern about night shelters because to me it doesn't actually resolve the issue. But I would have thought that rather than no change in the position in relation to night shelters, actually I would have thought that the position needs to be hardening up against it. I've been quite interested in the presentation this morning, but I would have thought in a COVID world, co-location just makes it even riskier now in relation to the night shelters. So can I get some feedback in slower time as to in fact, you know, the issue around night shelters is probably even more complicated now because of the need to ensure contact tracing as well as ensuring the social distancing, these people are vulnerable, and I would have thought co-location in the form of a shelter would actually exacerbate the risk of that particular problem. So it's not for now, but I think that there needs to be some more reflection around the risk of shelters in a COVID world.
Yeah, taken on board, Daniel. And as we as I said when Mark and Cohen presented that Debbie and Ben and the team will be at least assisting as best they can from an Auckland Council perspective. So, Debbie, have you got any final comments before I get Councillor Collins to close the debate and I can move the recommendation or put it?
No, thank you. Nothing further from me.
Councillor Collins to close.
Yeah, I have a question.
My humble apologies. I didn't look at my text again. Sorry, Councillor Bartley.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I hope this is coming through okay. Really, I agree with Councillor Casey. Thank you so much for the work that's gone into this. And I am proud of the team as well and to be part of this council. But my question is, on the ground, what is the difference that this will make? You know, like I had to deal with a young girl, Māori, sleeping on the street late at night, a little bit drunk. Actually, she was quite drunk. And there was nowhere for her to go. No, the police wouldn't take her and she didn't want to spend the night in a cell, which was her other option. And, even trying to get the ambulance to come because she was a little bit unconscious. And there was nothing that could be done for this person, this girl. So I just want to know, what is the impact that this strategy will have on the ground in situations like that? Please, thank you. Or in our areas that when we're not in the city and dealing.
Thank you, Councillor Bartley. Sorry, I did lose a little bit of your question because of the connection. But I think the really perhaps just to explain that across the region, this is a very busy and quite a chaotic space. And the thing that we have heard is how much the agencies really value much better kind of connections and better coordination. And so I think the regional plan provides a framework and a mechanism to do that at many levels, at a strategic level, but also kind of on the ground. Also in terms of, just sharing information, really understanding where the gaps are and what needs to happen to address those gaps, understanding what other agencies or NGOs are doing in different part of the regions and sharing that information. I mean, often in the role that we have, we're able to share, the sort of story that you just told, or we're able to say to a particular NGO, did you know that this other NGO is doing these particular things? So I think really kind of joining it up and having a much more connected approach at all levels will contribute to making a difference. And of course, in terms of identifying those gaps, we're also able to kind of influence how the services are delivered and some of the funding decisions around that as well. So hopefully that's helpful.
Councillor Bartley, just to let you know, you started doing the intermittent Wi-Fi issues that you had, and I'm just hoping that there's no more questions or comments you wish to make.
Thank you, Chair. No, it was that answers my question of what the difference the strategy will make on the ground in our wards. Thank you.
Thank you. There's no further comments, questions. I will put the recommendation. All those in favour?
Aye.
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 Against?
Aye.
Thank you. Against? Carried. Look, we'll have a break, and I'm sorry we've sort of gone over the 12:30 mark, but we'll have a break for lunch, and I'll see you guys back here about 3 o'clock. No, joking. See you back here just after about 1:05, if that's okay. Thank you.